The Commodore 64 is the best-selling computer of all time, and it went through a lot of changes during its 12-year run. From external redesigns to internal hardware changes, today we'll start an exploration of the ways that Commodore 64 evolved and changed, showcasing its many variations along the way. Welcome to the first full episode of 64 Commodore, the series dedicated to the restoration of the 64 Commodore computers. Along the way, we'll also highlight the restoration of select machines featured throughout the episode. Today, we're starting a deep dive on the Commodore 64, the machine that changed home computing forever. From its release in 1982 till the last one rolled off the line in 1994, the Commodore 64 went through countless revisions and improvements. As we explore the Commodore 64's evolution, keep in mind that Commodore didn't always make clean transitions and revisions. For instance, Silver Label models typically have a green cartridge port. But here, I have one that has a black port, highlighting the unpredictable nature of Commodore's production lines. This episode covers the early years of the Commodore 64, from its conception in 1981 to its rise to power in 1983. For this episode, we've restored 3 machines, each highlighting important aspects of Commodore 64's early history. Of course, we'll restore more as this series continues. One restoration proved so challenging, it almost broke me, and I eventually had to replace it with another machine. But beyond hardware and restorations, we're also going to relive the stories and the history of these machines and how they affected so many people, like some of you. Whether it was your first computer, a gateway to programming, or an amazing source of gaming entertainment, the Commodore 64 has a legacy that continues to this very day. So let's rewind the clock and start at the very beginning, exploring how a rushed yet brilliant design effort led to the creation of a computing legend.
IBM calls this a personal computer and says a person can afford it, yet it's over $1,500. Apple says computing is a revolution that can't be missed, but at $1,530 you could miss it. Atari says computers are now within reach. Well, the Commodore 64 has more built-in memory than the others, and it's under $600. So, while everyone else talks about the revolution that's coming, you can experience the revolution that's here.
In 1982, home computing was still young, dominated by systems like the Apple II, the Atari, and the Texas Instruments TI-99-4A. Commodore, already finding success with the PETs and the VIC-20, knew the market was ripe for something revolutionary. But first, they had to build it. The Commodore 64 had an unusually short development cycle, but that would make a whole video in its own. But in short, initially engineers Robert Yanes and Al Charpentier were working on custom chips. The VIC-2 for advanced graphics and the SID for groundbreaking sound, for a gaming-focused system to be called the Commodore Max. But in November of 1981, when Commodore CEO Jack Tramiel was shown these chips, he decided that they would instead be made into a computer and insisted that it should have 64K of RAM. He was gambling that by the time the machine hit the market, the price of so much expensive RAM would be viable. He instructed that a prototype should be ready for the January 1982 Consumer Electronics Show, which was only about 6 short weeks away. Having so little time to work with, Commodore quickly assembled a small team to design a completely new home computer. Under significant pressure, the team raced to get the prototype ready in time for its debut at CES. With attendees amazed at its powerful graphics and unprecedented sound capabilities, leading to its rapid rise to dominance.
You'd have to buy this many Atari computers for $899 each to get the same built-in memory as this many Commodore 64s for under $600.
For consumers in 1982, home computers were serious investments. At $595, the Commodore 64 was priced significantly lower than its competitors, but still, $595 is the equivalent of about $2,000 today. So this was not a small purchase. Competitors, like the Apple II, could easily exceed $1,200, or about $4,000 today. The Atari 800 launched at nearly $900, and the TI-99 4A, while less expensive, lacked the Commodore 64's significantly better sound and graphics capabilities. It also only had 16K of RAM, a quarter of what the Commodore 64 offered. The Commodore 64 didn't just compete, it offered a near arcade quality gaming experience at an incredible price. This is an original Silver Label Commodore 64 from 1982, named for its metallic silver badge. First edition manual, second printing, cable for RF to go to your television set, and of course to do that you're also going to need a switch box, and finally a beige power supply. And later these power supplies will become black and become known nowadays as the black brick of death. This one you can trust, not at all. So while I'll be using this power supply for demonstration purposes, I am going to avoid one retro experience, and that's frying the machine with a bad supply. I've tested this, it works fine, but still, I am going to include one of Ray Carlson's 64 savers on it so that in the event that the power supply fails while I'm filming this, the computer will not be damaged. These early models can also be identified by a 5-pin video connector on the back. Also, a Silver Label 64 typically has a green cartridge port. While this one's black, here's another one that's green. You can also see that the opening where the power connector connects is square and the labeling is different. And a brass RF shield is visible through the bottom case vents on these early machines. So these are things to look for when you're looking for a Silver Label 64.
Rather than compare personal computers ourselves, we asked the computers which one was better on the basis of price and memory. The Apple II preferred the Commodore 64. Then we asked the IBM, and it picked the Commodore 64. Then the Radio Shack chose the Commodore 64. That's what we like about our competition. They're so honest. The Commodore 64, what nobody else can give you at twice the price.
Many early Commodore 64s exhibited a sparkling effect on the screen, which was often blamed on early VIC-2 chips. However, as Al Charpentier explained in a paper published in the IEEE Spectrum magazine in March of 1985, the real culprit was noise from the Character ROM's precharger circuit designed to speed up access. The issue was intermittent, and initially the engineers did suspect the video chip. However, using a logic analyzer, they found a timing spike that caused the ROM to misinterpret addresses, feeding the wrong data to the video chip. These early models also exhibited an annoying 15.75 kHz whine in the audio. Despite these initial quirks, many early users were connecting their shiny new Commodore 64s up to TV sets via the RF modulator, and so these problems were less noticeable because of the poor quality an RF connection gives in the first place. Unfortunately, these sparkle problems could also cause sprite collisions, making game playing a frustrating affair. Because of these issues, many early machines got repaired under warranty and had the entire motherboard replaced with a later revision. Service centers were reportedly overwhelmed with the workload for repairing these issues because while it just entailed replacing a couple capacitors, the RF shield would have to be removed from every board to do the repair. So to keep up with the workload, Commodore resorted to replacing the entire mainboard in many machines. One service center worker in Portland, Oregon reported receiving replacement mainboards by the pallet in order to address this issue. Some users reportedly returned perfectly good Commodore 64s to the store, citing the sparkle issue as the reason for the return so they could turn around and just buy another machine at the then $200 lower price. It's also worth noting that a unique version of the main board, known as the KU14194HB, was briefly distributed in PAL regions. It was reportedly the same board as the original machines, except it had the updated video circuitry that we'll talk about in the next section. I don't currently have access to one, but it's still a really interesting piece of the Commodore 64's evolution. Commodore aggressively marketed the 64 as an affordable yet powerful alternative to its competitors, and it paid off. Despite the initial hiccups, its combination of price, performance, and a strong retail presence resulted in the sales of about 250,000 Commodore 64s by the end of 1982. A promising start for what would come to be the most successful computer of all time. One of the standout games of 1982 was Fort Apocalypse, a side-scrolling helicopter rescue game. It showed off the 64's smooth scrolling and sprite capabilities, making it clear that this machine was a force to be reckoned with in the gaming world. We played this game a lot back in the day, and for good reason. It was a great mix of action and strategy, and one of the best early showcases of what the Commodore 64 could do.
My Commodore 64. I sing with it, write with it, figure my path of flight with it. My Commodore 64. I rate with it, create with it, telecommunicate with it. My Commodore 64.
64K memory at a price that will put a computer in every home, business, and school years before anyone ever dreamed.
I adore my 64. My Commodore 64.
By 1983, the Commodore 64 was rapidly becoming a household staple, propelled by aggressive marketing campaigns focused on its gaming capabilities, affordability, and versatility. As its popularity soared, Commodore refined the system to address its shortcomings and reduce its production costs. I have one of those 1983 Commodore 64s right here, fully restored for this episode. This one has the common 250407 motherboard from mid-1983. It's a revision A, and it looks like it's had an interesting history. At some point, the owner has installed a reset switch, a handy addition, but definitely not factory original. The PLA chip has been replaced with one dated from 1987, suggesting a past repair. And I've temporarily replaced the SID with the new old stock one from the Stone Collection, so as to best represent the machine the way it was back in the day. Once this video is over, because I don't have any spare SIDs, I'll be installing a Pico SID as a replacement. These quirks are perfect examples of what many original owners experienced, modifying, upgrading, and maintaining their machines over the years. It also has a Rev 2 kernel ROM, which fixed a few bugs, primarily with RS-232 timing. The Commodore 64 kernel went through several revisions and a few offshoots along the way, but still has some issues. If you're interested in the subject, Robin at 8-Bit Show and Tell did an excellent deep dive on the subject. I'll drop a link in the description. One of the most noticeable changes in 1983 was the shift from the original Silver Label badge to the ubiquitous rainbow-striped Commodore badge. But the rainbow label wasn't the only external update. The cartridge port changed from green to black, the power connector opening became rounded instead of square, and eventually the bottom RF shield was switched from brass to silver. However, the most significant updates happened inside the machine. Commodore introduced this new 250407 motherboard, which was designed to streamline production and improve quality and reliability. One of the most important changes was the introduction of an 8-pin video port. This video port gives you separate Luma and Chroma signals, greatly improving video quality when paired with a compatible monitor. This video signal is very close to what eventually became S-Video, but this happened in 1983. Another major change was the first of several simplifications of the video circuitry, as you can see here, and the power requirements were eased as well, making the voltage regulator bake a little less than in the original board revision, especially with the new, much beefier heatsink that was added. They also fixed an issue from the original board where audio traces were routed too close to video, producing that 15.75 kilohertz whine. Another variation you may find is the color of the function keys. Over these early years, they started with tan keys, similar to the VIC-20, then reportedly went to brown, and finally gray. I can't actually find any brown function keys in my collection. However, I have found that the gray keys look brown after they've yellowed over time. Perhaps the biggest factor in the explosive growth during this period was a dramatic price change.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
The Commodore 64, now in a home family pack. A family pack containing the world's #1 selling home computer, a data cassette and joystick, a comprehensive teach-yourself program, plus 3 additional software packages. The Commodore family pack now available from your Commodore dealers and major retail stores. Now that's value for money.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore's keeping up with you.
Around June of 1983, Commodore dropped the price of the Commodore 64 in half, from $595 to under $300. This price cut made the Commodore 64 even more appealing to families, schools, and first-time computer buyers. Personally, this was the pivotal moment for me and heralded my entry into the Commodore ecosystem. That day, when I finally got that first computer of my very own, was one of those pivotal moments where the track of one's life is irrevocably changed forever. I'm still doing it to this day. I mean, that pretty much changed, yeah. Commodore's strategy of aggressive pricing with hardware improvements drove explosive growth. In 1983 alone, approximately 1.5 million Commodore 64s were sold, cementing it firmly as the dominant computer of its era. Moon Patrol, an arcade classic, was ported to the Commodore 64 beautifully in 1983. Its vibrant graphics, smooth parallax scrolling, and addictive gameplay make it an excellent showcase for the Commodore 64's capabilities. And as you probably know, to this day, it remains my go-to game for testing newly restored Commodore 64s. But I have to give honorable mention to David's Midnight Magic, a pinball simulation so captivating that even my mom joined in, making it the only video game I ever saw her play on a regular basis. Its fast-paced physics, colorful visuals, and engaging gameplay were amazing, and I think it holds up well, even to this day. Restoring these machines was rewarding, but one in particular almost broke me. Initially chosen to represent the very earliest production run, this machine was riddled with issues. Ultimately, though fully functional after restoration, it had become too modified and was no longer the representative of early Commodore 64s that I wanted. The full story of that challenging restoration is already available on the channel as a dedicated repair video. I don't know if I want you to watch that one. So let's take a look at this episode's restoration report. The first machine I pulled out ended up being a complete train wreck with severe rust, corrosion, and mold, so I decided to set it aside for a future Restoration Extreme. The first machine for this report and series was that original 1982 machine that just about broke my resolve. It needed a new fuse and 5-volt regulator, along with the accompanying heatsink, which was oddly missing. Both of the 6526 CIAs were defective, and I also had to replace 2 RAM chips. Finally, we replaced 2 defective Blue Logic chips, the 74LS257 and a 74LS258, and I had to replace 1 capacitor that had been damaged. Then there's the machine that replaced it. It was actually working out of the box. It still got a solid testing, then was thoroughly cleaned. This is the machine used to capture the game footage of Fort Apocalypse. The last time I played Fort Apocalypse was probably in the mid-80s, and I recorded this footage by loading the game from the very disc I used back in the day. Next, the 1983 250407 machine required a bit of finagling to get it to work. I made a detailed video of its resurrection as well if you want to see the gory details, but the short of it was that it had a bad SID causing bus contention. It also had 2 bad ROMs, the basic and the character ROMs, and it looked to be doing great once they were replaced. Looks can be deceiving though, and a test with a harness and diagnostic cartridge found that one of the CIAs was bad. After that was replaced, I still had one issue. I found that occasionally when I switched it on, it didn't come on. So I pulled the switch apart and found it was dirty, so I cleaned it. or at least I tried to clean it, but instead sent a teeny part flying across the room in a tragic tweezer incident. After recovering from the tragedy, I installed an entirely new Switch, and it's been working great. In fact, it was used to record the Moon Patrol game demos earlier in this episode. So there we go, 3 down, 61 to go. Exploring these early years of the Commodore 64 has shown just how quickly home computing evolved and how these changes impacted millions of us. These restored machines aren't just relics, they're reminders of our shared history, our first programming adventures, and countless hours spent gaming in our living rooms. There's so much more to the Commodore 64 story. In the next episode of 64 Commodore, we're going to take a look at the Amiga 1000 on its 40th anniversary. Then we'll continue this journey diving deep into the golden years of the Commodore 64, exploring how it continued to evolve and innovate from 1984 and beyond. I hope you've enjoyed reliving these formative years of computing history with me. Check out this video of the one that almost broke me, or this one introducing the 64 Commodores. Thanks for coming, and I'll see you next time on 64 Commodore.